Amara was sitting on her bed, braiding her hair while humming a hymn from choir practice. Her small room was quiet, except for the soft sound of her humming. On her desk, her Bible lay open, and a half-finished notebook rested beside it. This was her usual place to think, pray, and escape the suffocating expectations of being Pastor Ezekiel's daughter. She loved her father dearly, but the weight of being the daughter of Lagos's most famous pastor was often too much to bear. People were always watching her, whispering about how she dressed or spoke, as if her every move was a reflection of her father's holiness. "Amara!" Her father's voice boomed from downstairs, interrupting her thoughts. "Yes, Daddy," she called back, setting down her braid. "Come downstairs. I need to speak with you." The tone of his voice was different, urgent, almost fearful. Amara's stomach twisted with unease as she stood up, her bare feet touching the cold tiled floor. She hadn't heard him sound like that before. As she descended the staircase, she saw her father standing at the bottom, his face etched with worry. Beside him stood Elder Chikwudi, one of the church's senior leaders. They stopped speaking abruptly when she appeared. "Is everything okay?" she asked, glancing between the two men. "Go back to your room," her father said sharply, his eyes avoiding hers. "Daddy." "Amara, I said go." Confused and hurt, Amara obeyed, retreating to her room. But as she closed her door, she could still hear their voices faintly. Pressing her ear to the wooden surface, she caught fragments of their conversation. "We can't let her find out. It's too risky. She's already suspicious." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. What couldn't she find out? What were they hiding? She sat back down on her bed, her mind racing. For the first time, she wondered if the church she had always trusted might not be as holy as it seemed. Amara sat frozen on her bed, her fingers gripping the edge of the mattress. Her father's voice, deep and commanding, echoed in her mind. "We can't let her find out. It's too risky." She couldn't shake the tone of urgency, nor the way Elder Chikwudi's voice had wavered in response. Her chest tightened with questions that seemed to have no immediate answers. For years, she had trusted her father and the church implicitly. Her life was built on the foundation of faith and family, the two pillars that held her world together. But now, for the first time, doubt crept in like a shadow, unsettling and unwelcome. She wanted to push the thoughts away, to convince herself she had misunderstood. But the whispered conversation between her father and the elder replayed in her mind, each fragment of dialogue stoking her unease. The next morning, Amara awoke with the lingering heaviness of the previous night. The sunlight streamed through her bedroom window, but it did little to brighten her mood. She dressed for the day, a simple white blouse and a modest skirt, and made her way downstairs. Her father was already seated at the dining table, sipping his usual morning tea. His Bible lay open in front of him, as it often did. But today he seemed distracted, flipping through the pages without focus. "Good morning, Daddy," she greeted him, her voice cautious. "Morning, my dear," he replied, his tone warm but tinged with an unfamiliar weariness. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes," she lied, sitting down across from him. She wanted to ask about last night, about what he and Elder Chikwudi had been discussing, but the words caught in her throat. Her father's presence was commanding, even in moments of silence, and she feared prying too deeply. As they ate breakfast, Pastor Ezekiel cleared his throat. "Amara," he began, his eyes locking onto hers, "I want you to be careful with your thoughts and actions. There are things about the church that are complicated." Amara blinked, unsure how to respond. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Not everything is as simple as it seems. Sometimes, for the greater good, sacrifices must be made. Do you understand?" Her heart skipped a beat. The word sacrifices lingered ominously in the air. "I don't understand, Daddy," she said softly. He sighed and shook his head. "You don't need to, my dear. Just trust me and trust the church. That's all I ask." Amara nodded hesitantly, but her mind was far from settled. Later that day, Amara went to the church for her usual choir practice. The large sanctuary, with its high vaulted ceilings and ornate stained glass windows, was a place that had always brought her peace. But now, as she walked through the building, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was hiding secrets. The choir director, Sister Grace, was already there, arranging sheet music. She greeted Amara with a tight smile, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "Are you okay, Sister Grace?" Amara asked, noticing her unease. Yes, Sister Grace replied quickly. "Just a lot on my mind." Throughout practice, Amara couldn't help but notice how distracted Sister Grace seemed. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages of the sheet music, and her voice lacked its usual confidence. After practice ended and the other choir members had left, Amara lingered behind. "Sister Grace," she said, her voice low, "is something bothering you?" Sister Grace hesitated, glancing around as if to ensure no one else was listening. Finally, she leaned in and whispered, "Amara, there are things in this church, things you wouldn't understand. Be careful, child." "What things?" Amara pressed, her curiosity piqued. But before Sister Grace could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed through the sanctuary. Elder Chikwudi appeared at the doorway, his expression stern. "Amara, your father is looking for you," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Amara nodded, her heart sinking as she left Sister Grace behind. That evening, as Amara was helping to clean the sanctuary, she stumbled across something that sent a chill down her spine. Beneath the pulpit, hidden among old hymnals and papers, was a crumpled letter. Curious, she picked it up and unfolded it. The letter was written in hurried, almost frantic handwriting. "To whomever finds this, the church is not what it seems. They speak of salvation, but behind closed doors, there is darkness. If you value your life, stay away from the back room. It is where everything begins, and it is where it will end." Amara's hands trembled as she read the letter. Her mind raced with questions. Who had written it? What was the back room? She folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket, her heart pounding. Whatever was happening in the church, she was determined to find out. That night, as Amara lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, her mind spinning with everything she had seen and heard. Her father's cryptic warning, Sister Grace's nervousness, the letter. It was all too much to ignore. She knew that if she wanted answers, she would have to take matters into her own hands. But deep down, she feared that the truth might be more than she was ready to handle. The following morning, Amara woke with a sense of dread. The letter from the night before was still tucked under her pillow, its presence haunting her. She sat up in bed, running her fingers through her braids as she tried to piece together the fragments of what she had overheard, seen, and felt. What exactly was happening in the church? The letter had mentioned the back room, but she couldn't recall ever seeing such a space. She decided she would have to explore the church more closely, even if it meant sneaking around after hours. Later that day, during choir practice, Amara paid close attention to everything and everyone around her. The large sanctuary, usually a place of comfort, now felt oppressive. The high ceilings and tall stained glass windows seemed to loom over her, casting long shadows that stretched unnervingly across the pews. Sister Grace was even more jittery than the day before. Her hands fumbled with the sheet music, and her voice cracked as she directed the choir. At one point, she dropped her clipboard, scattering papers everywhere. "I'm sorry," she murmured, crouching down to pick up the papers. Amara rushed to help her. "Are you sure you're okay, Sister Grace?" she whispered. Sister Grace glanced around nervously before replying in a hushed tone. "Amara, please, don't ask me any more questions. It's better if you don't know." "But I already know something is wrong," Amara insisted. "I found a letter." "Stop," Sister Grace interrupted, her voice sharp. "You shouldn't have done that." Her sudden outburst drew the attention of the other choir members, who paused mid-song to look at them. Sister Grace quickly plastered a nervous smile on her face and waved them off. "Keep practicing," she said, her voice trembling. Amara sat back down, her curiosity now burning hotter than ever. After choir practice ended, Amara decided to linger behind again. This time, she climbed up to the choir loft, a space above the sanctuary that provided a bird's-eye view of the entire church. From up there, she could see the altar, the pulpit, and even the back hallways that led to the offices and storage rooms. As she sat quietly in the loft, she noticed something unusual. A group of people, Elder Chikwudi, Sister Grace, and two other church leaders, were gathered near the pulpit. They were speaking in hushed tones, their heads close together. Amara strained to hear their conversation, but the distance made it impossible. She crept closer, careful not to make a sound. The choir loft had a small staircase that led down to the side of the sanctuary, and she used it to move closer to the group. "I told you she's starting to ask questions," Sister Grace was saying, her voice urgent. "Then keep her distracted," Elder Chikwudi replied. "We can't afford for her to dig any deeper." "What if she finds out about the back room?" one of the other leaders asked. "She won't," Elder Chikwudi said firmly. "And if she does, we'll handle it." Amara's blood ran cold. Handle it? What did that mean? She stayed hidden behind one of the columns, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but she knew it wasn't the right time. She needed more evidence. As the group dispersed, Amara slipped out of the church unnoticed. Her mind was racing. The mention of the back room confirmed that the letter had been telling the truth. But why was it so important? What were they hiding in there? She resolved to return to the church that night. If she was going to find answers, she would have to see the back room for herself. That evening, after her father had gone to bed, Amara quietly left the house. The streets of Lagos were quieter than usual, the hum of the city muted under the dim glow of streetlights. She wrapped herself in a shawl and made her way to the church, her footsteps echoing on the pavement. When she arrived, the church was dark and locked, as she had expected. But Amara knew where the spare key was hidden, in a planter near the side entrance. She retrieved it and slipped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. The sanctuary was eerily silent, the moonlight filtering through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. Amara's footsteps were soft as she made her way toward the back of the church, where the hallways led to the offices and storage rooms. She found the back room easily. It was a door she had passed many times but had never thought much of before. Now, as she stood in front of it, she noticed that the door had no handle, only a keyhole. Amara knelt down to inspect the lock, her mind racing. She had no key, but she was determined to find a way inside. Just then, she heard a noise behind her, a soft creak, like a footstep. She whipped around, her heart leaping into her throat. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The silence that followed was deafening. Amara felt a surge of fear, but forced herself to stay calm. She pressed herself against the wall, straining her ears for any sound. The creak came again, closer this time. And then, from the shadows, a voice spoke. "You shouldn't be here, Amara." Her blood turned to ice. It was Elder Chikwudi. Amara's heart pounded as Elder Chikwudi stepped out from the shadows. His tall frame seemed even more imposing in the dim light of the church. His eyes, usually calm and fatherly, were now cold and piercing. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. Amara's mind raced for an excuse. She couldn't let him know the real reason she was standing in front of the back room. I forgot my notebook from choir practice," she stammered, pointing vaguely toward the sanctuary. "I thought I might have left it here." Elder Chikwudi's gaze didn't waver. He studied her for a moment that felt like an eternity before nodding slowly. "The church is closed at night, Amara. You shouldn't be wandering around here alone. It's dangerous." His words sent a chill down her spine. Dangerous? In the house of God? "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll leave now." Elder Chikwudi stepped closer, blocking her path. "You're Pastor Ezekiel's daughter," he said, his tone softening but not losing its edge. "You should know better than to question things you don't understand. Go home, Amara." Amara nodded quickly and turned to leave, her legs trembling beneath her. As she walked away, she could feel his eyes following her until she exited the church. When she got home, Amara locked herself in her room and pulled the letter from under her pillow. She read it again, her fingers trembling as they traced the frantic handwriting. "Stay away from the back room. It is where everything begins, and it is where it will end." The warning echoed in her mind, colliding with Elder Chikwudi's ominous words. The back room was clearly important, But why? What could possibly be hidden there in a place meant for worship and salvation? As she sat on her bed, her phone buzzed. It was a text from her best friend, Chica. "Hey girl, you okay? Haven't heard from you all day." Amara hesitated before replying. "I'm fine. Just thinking about some stuff." Chica responded almost immediately. "Church stuff again? You need to stop stressing yourself. Not everything is a mystery, you know." Amara frowned at the message. She wanted to confide in Chica, to tell her about the letter in the back room, but something held her back. Could she even trust her best friend with something this big? Instead, she replied, "Yeah, maybe you're right." But deep down, she knew she couldn't let it go. The next day, Amara returned to the church for Bible study, her mind still consumed by questions. She arrived early, hoping to find Sister Grace and get some answers. She spotted Sister Grace in the small kitchen at the back of the church, preparing tea for the elders. Her hands were steady this time, but her face looked pale and drawn, as if she hadn't slept. "Sister Grace," Amara began hesitantly, stepping into the kitchen. The older woman looked up, startled. "Amara, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," Amara said, her voice low. "It's about the letter I found in the back room." Sister Grace's expression shifted immediately, fear flashing across her face. She grabbed Amara's arm and pulled her into the pantry, closing the door behind them. "Are you out of your mind?" Sister Grace hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't be asking questions like that. It's dangerous." "Why does everyone keep saying that?" Amara whispered back, her frustration boiling over. "What's so dangerous about the truth? What's in the back room?" Sister Grace shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "You don't understand, Amara. The things that happen in this church, they're not what you think. It's not just prayer and sermons. There are sacrifices." Amara's breath caught in her throat. "Sacrifices?" she echoed, her voice trembling. Sister Grace nodded, her hands gripping Amara's tightly. "I can't say more. They'll know. They always know." "Who? The elders?" Sister Grace didn't answer. Instead, she pulled away and opened the pantry door. "Forget about the letter. Forget about the back room. For your own safety, Amara, leave this alone." But Amara couldn't forget. Not now. That evening, as Amara sat alone in her room, she replayed Sister Grace's words over and over. The truth was closer than ever, but it was also more terrifying than she had imagined. Her resolve hardened. She had to know what was in the back room, no matter the cost. Late that night, Amara waited until her father had gone to bed before slipping out of the house again. This time, she brought a flashlight and a screwdriver, determined to find a way into the back room. When she arrived at the church, the building was just as silent and foreboding as the night before. She used the spare key to enter and made her way to the back hallway. Standing in front of the door again, Amara's heart raced. She crouched down and began working on the lock with the screwdriver, her hands shaking with a mix of fear and adrenaline. After what felt like an eternity, the lock clicked open. Amara hesitated for a moment, her hand on the doorknob. Then, summoning all her courage, she pushed the door open. The room beyond was dark and cold, the air thick with an unfamiliar metallic smell. She shone her flashlight around, and what she saw made her stomach turn. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with strange, ritualistic objects, candles, bones, jars of unidentifiable substances. In the center of the room was a table, stained dark with something Amara didn't want to identify. Her flashlight flickered as her hand shook violently. This wasn't just a storage room. This was something else entirely. As she stood frozen in horror, she heard footsteps echoing in the hallway behind her. And then, a voice. "Amara, I warned you." It was her father. Amara turned slowly, the flashlight trembling in her hand. Standing in the doorway was her father, Pastor Ezekiel, his face obscured by the shadows. For a moment, she thought she saw the faintest glint of sorrow in his eyes, but it disappeared as quickly as it had come. His expression hardened, his voice low and steady. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, stepping into the room. "I should be asking you that," Amara shot back, her voice wavering. She gestured at the bizarre objects around the room. What is all this? What are you hiding? Her father sighed deeply, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch sent a shiver down Amara's spine. You weren't supposed to see this, he said. Not ever. See what? Amara's voice rose. That the church is hiding something? That you've been lying to everyone? This is not a lie, Pastor Ezekiel said, his voice tinged with a quiet authority that Amara knew well. This is something you cannot understand. It's for the greater good. Amara took a step back, her anger flaring. The greater good? You preach about light, truth, and salvation. But this is darkness. It's wrong. Her father's face tightened, and for the first time in her life, Amara saw a side of him she didn't recognize. You don't know what you're talking about, child, he said sharply. Everything I've done, everything the church has done, is to protect our people. Protect us from what? Amara demanded, her voice breaking. What could possibly justify this? Pastor Ezekiel hesitated, his gaze falling to the floor. For a moment, it seemed as though he might explain, but then he straightened, his face a mask of resolve. You shouldn't have come here, he said simply. Amara's grip tightened on the flashlight. So that's it? You're not going to tell me anything? You're just going to keep lying? I'm trying to keep you safe, he said, his voice softening. The less you know, the better. No, Amara snapped. I deserve to know the truth. You can't just keep hiding behind sermons and scripture. What is this place? What are you doing here? Her father stared at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, It's a covenant. One that was made long before you were born. Amara frowned, confusion mixing with her anger. A covenant? What kind of covenant? Pastor Ezekiel sighed again, running a hand over his face. The church was struggling when I became pastor. Attendance was low, donations were barely enough to keep the lights on, and the people, they were losing hope. So you made a deal? Amara asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Her father nodded slowly. It wasn't just me. The elders and I agreed. There was then opportunity, a way to ensure the church would thrive. But it came with conditions. What kind of conditions? Amara pressed, her stomach sinking. Pastor Ezekiel didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, his gaze heavy with regret. Amara, you're my daughter. I've tried to shield you from this your entire life. But now that you've seen it, you have a choice. You can walk away, forget everything, and live a normal life. Or what? Amara whispered, her heart pounding. Or you can stay and be part of this, he said. But if you stay, you must understand. There are things in this world that require sacrifice. Things that cannot be explained in the light of day. Amara shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, this isn't right. Whatever deal you made, it's not worth it. How can you stand here and call yourself a man of God? Pastor Ezekiel's face darkened. You think faith is simple? That it's all hymns and miracles? Faith is about survival, Amara. About doing what's necessary to keep the people you love safe. This isn't faith, Amara said, her voice trembling. This is fear, and I won't be a part of it. Her father's expression softened for a moment, but then he stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. Then leave. But understand this. If you walk away, you can never come back. The church, the family, the life you know. It will all be gone. Amara stared at him, her heart breaking. She couldn't believe the man she had looked up to her entire life was standing before her, giving her such an impossible ultimatum. I can't stay, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father nodded, his face unreadable. Then go. Without another word, Amara turned and walked out of the room, her legs shaky and her heart heavy. As she stepped out into the cold night air, she knew her life would never be the same. Amara wandered the dark streets of Lagos, her thoughts a storm of anger, heartbreak, and confusion. The conversation with her father replayed in her mind, each word cutting deeper than the last. Her feet moved without direction, carrying her farther away from the church and everything she had ever known. She had always been the obedient daughter, the perfect reflection of what a pastor's child should be. But now, everything felt like a lie. How could she have spent her entire life devoted to a church that was built on secrets and fear? By the time she reached Chica's apartment, it was almost midnight. Amara hesitated before knocking, unsure of what to say. She hadn't planned to come here, but it was the only place she felt remotely safe. The door opened almost immediately, and Chica's face lit up in surprise. Amara? What are you doing here so late? I need a place to stay, Amara said, her voice barely audible. Chica's smile vanished as she stepped aside to let her in. Of course. Are you okay? You look shaken. Amara shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't even know where to begin. Chica closed the door and guided her to the couch. Start wherever you can, she said gently. For the next hour, Amara poured out everything. The letter, the strange happenings at the church, the confrontation with her father, and the ominous room filled with ritualistic objects. Chica listened in stunned silence, her expression shifting from shock to anger to disbelief. That's insane, Chica said when Amara finally finished. I mean, I always thought some of the church elders were sketchy, but this? A covenant? Sacrifices? Amara nodded, wiping her eyes. I don't know what to do, Chica. My whole life has been built around that church, around my father. And now, I don't even recognize him. Chica reached over and squeezed her hand. You did the right thing by leaving, Amara. Whatever they're involved in, it's not your burden to carry. But you can't face this alone. You need help. Help from who? Amara asked bitterly. Everyone I know is either part of the church or would never believe me. Chica hesitated before replying. What about the woman who wrote the letter? Maybe she can give you answers. Amara blinked, realizing Chica was right. The letter had come from someone who clearly knew more than she did. But how could she find them? The letter hadn't been signed, and she had no idea who might have written it. Do you still have it? Chica asked. Amara pulled the crumpled letter from her pocket and handed it over. Chica examined it carefully, her eyes narrowing. Look at this, she said, pointing to the corner of the page. Amara leaned closer and saw a faint watermark, an emblem of a dove surrounded by a circle of flames. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. That's not from the church, Chica said. I've seen this symbol before, but I can't remember where. Amara stared at the emblem, her mind racing. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. The next morning, Chica made a few calls while Amara rested on the couch. By the afternoon, she had a lead. There's a small fellowship group in the city that uses that symbol, Chica explained. They're not connected to your father's church, but they're known for speaking out against corrupt practices in religious organizations. Maybe someone there knows something. Amara felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. Where can I find them? They meet in a rented hall on the outskirts of town, Chica said. I can take you there tonight. Amara nodded, her resolve hardening. She didn't know what she would find, but she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how deep it went. That evening, Chica drove them to the fellowship's meeting place, a modest building tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. The air was thick with anticipation as Amara stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room for anything familiar. The group was small, about 20 people gathered in a circle. At the center was a woman who seemed to command attention with her calm, authoritative presence. She looked to be in her late 40s, with sharp features and a piercing gaze. When Amara saw the emblem embroidered on the woman's scarf, the same dove and flames from the letter, her heart skipped a beat. Excuse me, Amara said, stepping forward. Are you the one who wrote this? She held up the letter. The woman's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly composed herself. Come with me, she said, motioning toward a side room. Amara and Chica followed her, their footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. When they reached a small office, the woman closed the door behind them and turned to face Amara. My name is Sister Abigail, she said. And yes, I wrote the letter. I didn't expect you to act on it so quickly. Amara felt a mix of relief and anger. You knew what was happening in the church, and you didn't do anything to stop it? Sister Abigail sighed, her expression weary. It's not as simple as you think. The covenant your father and the elders made is deeply rooted in something dangerous. I tried to warn people, but the church's influence is powerful. They silenced anyone who dared to speak out. What kind of covenant is it? Amara asked. Sister Abigail hesitated before answering. It's a pact with an ancient force. They believe it gives them protection and prosperity, but it comes at a cost they've been hiding for years. Amara's blood ran cold. What kind of cost? Sister Abigail met her gaze, her voice low. Sacrifices. Human sacrifices. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. Amara felt her knees weaken as the reality of what she had uncovered sank in. The church, her father, everything she had believed in. It was all part of something far darker than she had imagined. What do I do now? She whispered, her voice trembling. Sister Abigail placed a hand on her shoulder. You've already taken the first step by walking away. But if you want to stop this, it won't be easy. The church will come after you. They won't let you expose them. Amara swallowed hard, determination rising within her. I don't care. I can't let this continue. Sister Abigail nodded, her expression grim. Then we'll start with the truth. But you must be ready for what comes next. Amara nodded, her fear giving way to a fierce resolve. She didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. She couldn't turn back now. The words human sacrifices echoed in Amara's mind long after she and Chica left the fellowship hall. The revelation felt unreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. As they drove back to Chica's apartment, the city lights blurred past, but Amara's thoughts were far away, trapped in the dark room at her father's church and the chilling words of Sister Abigail. Chica broke the silence, her voice tense. So what's the plan now? Are you going to try and take this down? Expose them? Amara looked at her friend, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on her shoulders. I don't know where to start, she admitted. This isn't just about my father. The entire church, the elders, the congregation, they're all part of it, whether they realize it or not. Chica tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Well, you're not doing this alone. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Amara gave her a grateful smile, but her heart was still heavy. She wasn't sure if anyone could truly help her with what was coming. Back at the apartment, Amara sat in the living room, poring over the letter and the faint memories of her father's cryptic words. He had called it a covenant, something ancient, something that couldn't be broken. Her thoughts were interrupted by Chica entering the room with a laptop. I've been thinking, Chica said, setting the laptop on the table. If this covenant thing is as old as Sister Abigail says, there has to be some kind of record. Something historical. Amara nodded, intrigued. You think we can find something online? Maybe, Chica said, pulling up a search engine. It's worth a shot. They spent the next few hours searching for anything related to the church's history, the emblem on the letter, and the concept of spiritual covenants. Most of what they found was vague. References to folklore and rumors of secret societies operating under the guise of religious organizations. But then, Amara stumbled across a blog post from years ago, written by an anonymous former church member. The post described strange rituals and a hidden room where unspeakable acts were performed. This has to be it, Amara said, pointing at the screen. Chica leaned in, reading the post aloud. The Church of Divine Restoration is not what it seems. They lure people in with promises of salvation, but behind closed doors, there's a darkness no one talks about. I left before they could drag me in too deep, but I've heard the whispers of sacrifices, of bloodshed, of a covenant older than the city itself. Amara's breath caught in her throat. This person knows the truth. Chica scrolled down, but the post ended abruptly. There was no name, no way to contact the author. Do you think this person is still alive? Chica asked. I don't know, Amara said, leaning back in her chair. But if they are, they might be the only one who can help me. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and restless nights. Amara tried to contact Sister Abigail again, but the fellowship hall was locked, and no one answered her calls. Chica continued to dig into online forums and old news articles, but every lead seemed to hit a dead end. And then, one night, a text message lit up Amara's phone. Stop digging. It's too dangerous. They're watching you. Her blood ran cold. The number was unlisted, and there was no way to trace it. Who do you think it's from? Chica asked when Amara showed her the message. I don't know, Amara said, her voice trembling, but it means they know I'm looking. The following evening, as Amara was leaving Chica's apartment to get some air, she noticed a black car parked across the street. Its windows were tinted, and the engine was running, but no one got out. Her heart raced as she turned back toward the building, trying to act normal. The moment she stepped inside, she called Chica. There's a car outside, she said, her voice shaking. I think they're watching me. Chica cursed under her breath. Okay, don't panic. Stay inside, and don't go anywhere alone. Amara nodded, though fear gripped her tightly. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. Late that night, as she lay awake on the couch, the sound of footsteps outside the apartment caught her attention. She froze, straining to hear more. The footsteps stopped, and a shadow passed by the window. Amara's heart pounded in her chest as she grabbed her phone and dialed Chica, who was asleep in the next room. Chica, she whispered urgently. Someone's outside. Chica was awake in seconds, grabbing a kitchen knife and joining Amara in the living room. They both stood silently, watching the door. After a tense few minutes, the shadow disappeared, and the footsteps retreated. That's it, Chica said, her voice firm. We're not staying here anymore. It's too dangerous. Amara nodded, her resolve hardening. We need to find whoever wrote that blog post. If they've been through this, they'll know what to do. The next morning, Chica made arrangements for them to stay with a friend in a different part of the city. Before leaving, Amara took one last look at the apartment, her chest tightening with a mix of fear and determination. She didn't know where this path would lead her, but one thing was clear. The shadows of the Covenant were closing in, and she couldn't afford to stop now. The city of Lagos buzzed with the usual energy as Amara and Chica made their way to the new apartment. It was in a quieter part of the city, far from the dangerous shadows that seemed to follow Amara wherever she went. They arrived at the small, modest building and climbed to the third floor, where Chica's friend, Amina, lived. Amina was a quiet woman in her late 20s who worked in a local library and had always been supportive of Chica's many causes. She welcomed them with open arms, but there was an unease in her eyes as she looked over Amara. The fear that had gripped Amara seemed to have spread to everyone she came in contact with. I'm glad you're both here, Amina said, leading them into her apartment. But I have to admit, I'm a little worried. I've heard some whispers about the church, but nothing like this. Amara didn't know how to respond. What could she say? That her father's church had ties to something ancient and dark, something that preyed on people's faith? Or that she had run away to protect herself, and anyone close to her was now in danger? Have you heard about the elders? Amara asked. The ones involved in the Covenant? Amina nodded slowly, sitting down on a worn but cozy sofa. I've heard stories, mostly rumors, but I didn't want to believe them. People have always been afraid to talk about the church's leadership, you know? They say things are strange behind closed doors. But you're the first one I know who's actually seen it with their own eyes. Amara swallowed hard. It's worse than I thought. I need to find the person who wrote the blog post. They might be the only one who can help me. Chica stepped forward. We've been trying to track down any clues, but every lead seems to take us in circles. Amina shifted uneasily. I might know someone who could help. There's an old man, a historian, who spent most of his life studying religious movements in Lagos. His name is Professor Obinna. He's written some books about the origins of certain cults and secret societies in West Africa. If anyone knows about ancient covenants or symbols, it's him. Amara's heart leapt. Do you think he could help us? I can try to contact him, Amina said, but he's eccentric. It might take a while for him to agree to meet. Chica and Amara exchanged a glance. What else could they do? The clock was ticking, and they needed answers fast. They agreed to give Amina a day to reach out to the professor and, in the meantime, decided to take things into their own hands. The following morning, Amina received a message from Professor Obinna. He had agreed to meet them later that afternoon at a small cafe near the university. The meeting place was neutral, and Amina warned them that the professor wasn't someone who would easily trust outsiders. Be careful what you ask him, Amina cautioned. He might know more than he lets on. But he's also very protective of his research. Amara and Chica were ready for anything. They had no other choice. They arrived at the cafe and found a table in the corner, waiting anxiously. A few minutes later, a man in his late 60s entered the cafe, his steps slow but purposeful. His silver hair was tied back in a small ponytail, and he wore round glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked exactly like someone who had spent decades studying history, and perhaps like someone who knew more than he was willing to share. "Are you the two who wanted to speak with me?" the professor asked, his voice calm yet stern. "Yes, Professor Obina," Amara said, standing to greet him. "Thank you for meeting us." He nodded, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. "Amina told me what you're looking for, but I warn you, what you seek might be better left unknown." Chica opened her mouth to respond, but Amara cut her off. "We need to know about the covenant," she said firmly. "It's tied to my father's church. We believe there's something ancient and dangerous happening there. We need to understand what we're up against." Professor Obina leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "The covenant you speak of, it's old, very old. Older than your father's church, perhaps older than the city itself. And it is not something that can be easily understood by people who are not already entrenched in its practices." He paused, studying them both with an inscrutable gaze. "But I will tell you this. The covenant you're talking about isn't just a contract with an ancient force. It's an exchange of power, an offer made by an entity that does not care for the well-being of humanity. Those who enter into such pacts are bound, not just by faith, but by blood." Amara's chest tightened at the words. "Blood?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," the professor said softly. "In some cases, the blood of those who are willing to give up everything, even their own soul, in exchange for power. The price is steep, and the longer they hold to the covenant, the more they lose themselves." Chica frowned. "But why would your father, or any leader, make such a choice? Why sacrifice their people for power?" The professor sighed. "Because the power offered by the covenant is often seen as the only way to survive. These types of pacts often occur during times of great unrest, when hope is lost. The church your father runs may not be the church it once was. It may have been desperate for something to keep it from crumbling." Amara shook her head, trying to process everything the professor was saying. "But if this has been going on for so long, why hasn't anyone stopped it?" The professor's eyes darkened. "The covenant has a way of protecting itself. Those who try to expose it often find themselves silenced, one way or another. It is not a force that gives up easily." Amara felt a chill run through her. She had already been warned by the mysterious text message, but hearing this from someone so knowledgeable confirmed her worst fears. "So, what do we do now?" Chica asked, her voice urgent. Professor Obina leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "If you are truly determined to confront the covenant, you must be prepared to sacrifice much more than you think. It will not be easy, and you may not survive it. But there is one place where the heart of this power resides, somewhere hidden within the church. If you can find it and destroy it, you may be able to break the pact." Amara's pulse quickened. "Where is this place?" Professor Obina leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. "I don't know the exact location, but I know it's hidden beneath the church, in the oldest part of the building. The room you've seen, the one with the strange symbols, that is only the beginning. There are deeper chambers, chambers that are locked away, even from the highest authorities within the church. If you want to find the heart of the covenant, that's where you must go." Amara exchanged a glance with Chica, determination burning in her chest. "We'll go there," Amara said. "We'll find the heart and end it." The professor gave a small, sorrowful nod. "Then be careful. The covenant doesn't let go without a fight." The night before their planned infiltration of the church, Amara couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. She had always viewed her father's church as a sanctuary, a place of refuge and light. But now, it felt like a labyrinth of dark secrets, each step further into its halls pulling her deeper into a world she didn't recognize. The professor's words echoed in her ears. The covenant doesn't let go without a fight. She turned over in her bed, staring at the ceiling as the sound of distant traffic filled the apartment. Chica was already asleep on the couch, her face peaceful despite the weight of the situation. Amara envied her friend's calm. She wasn't sure if Chica truly understood how dangerous this could get. They had no idea what they were walking into tomorrow, and even if they succeeded, what would be left of them afterward? She closed her eyes and thought of her father, Pastor Ezekiel. She had spent her entire life admiring him, trusting him, but now she wasn't sure who he really was. Was he a man of God, or had he been consumed by something darker? She loved him, and yet, she knew that if she didn't stop what was happening, there might be no way back for him. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest, and she sat up abruptly, pulling her knees to her chest. The shadows had always been there, lurking in the corners of her thoughts. Now they had taken physical form, and they were closing in. The next morning, Amara and Chica prepared for their mission. They gathered what they would need: flashlights, a small first aid kit, a few tools to help them break into locked rooms, and a thick, leather-bound journal Amara had found in the church library the previous week. It was an old, dusty volume, filled with cryptic notes and references to rituals she could barely understand. But she had seen the same symbols in her father's office, symbols she now knew were tied to the covenant. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," Chica said, stuffing the journal into her bag. She had always been brave, but there was an edge to her voice now, a hint of fear. What if we can't find anything? Or worse, what if we're caught? Amara gave her a reassuring smile, though she felt just as uncertain. "We won't get caught. We're careful. We'll stick to the plan." Chica nodded, but Amara could see the worry in her eyes. They both knew this wasn't just a matter of sneaking into a church. They were walking into the heart of something far darker and more dangerous. But there was no going back now. The truth had to be uncovered, no matter the cost. By the time they arrived at the church, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the building. The imposing structure loomed ahead, its high spires and tall stained glass windows giving it a majestic yet intimidating presence. To any casual observer, it was still a place of worship, a sanctuary for the faithful. But to Amara, it felt like the home of a monster waiting to awaken. The doors were locked as usual, but Amara knew where the side entrance was. She had passed it many times as a child, always with her father or another member of the church's inner circle. It was a discreet back door, used by the staff and those with permission to enter and leave after hours. Chica and Amara stood in the shadows behind the church, taking a deep breath before they made their move. The air felt thick, as if the very atmosphere was charged with the weight of the secrets that lay within. Amara glanced over at her friend. Chica's face was set in determination, but there was a flicker of anxiety in her eyes. "You ready?" Amara asked, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "As ready as I'll ever be," Chica replied, her tone laced with resolve. They slipped into the back alley and made their way to the door. Amara fumbled with the keys she had taken from her father's office. She had been careful to make sure no one noticed they were missing. After a tense moment, the lock clicked open, and the door creaked as it swung inward. The scent of old wood and incense filled their noses as they stepped inside. The church was eerily quiet, with only the soft hum of air conditioning breaking the silence. The faint smell of candles lingered in the air, and the low murmur of distant voices from the sanctuary echoed faintly through the hallways. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. Amara's heart thudded in her chest as they navigated the familiar halls, now twisted with the knowledge of what lay hidden beneath them. The church seemed different now, as if the very walls held secrets that reached out to trap them. Chica held the flashlight, scanning the hallway as they made their way toward the rear of the building. The old library was their first stop. The journal they had found had mentioned a hidden passage somewhere beneath the church. Amara hoped they could find it before anyone noticed they were there. They reached the library and paused outside the heavy wooden door. Amara glanced at Chica, who gave a quick nod before reaching for the door handle. It creaked as it opened, the smell of dust and old paper hitting them. The room was dimly lit, with shelves stacked high with old books. But Amara didn't come here to read. She was looking for the hidden clues that would lead her deeper into the church. "This is it," Amara whispered. "We need to find the passage." They began searching, scanning every inch of the room for any sign of a hidden door or mechanism. Chica moved toward the far corner where a large portrait of an angel hung on the wall. It was an elaborate painting, But Amara knew it wasn't just art. It had always felt out of place in the church, too ornate, too grand. "Wait," Chica said, her voice tense. She ran her hand over the edge of the frame, and a soft click echoed through the room. Amara's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" she asked, stepping closer. Chica pulled at the frame, revealing a narrow, spiral staircase leading downward. The air that rushed up from the stairs was cool and damp, and a chill ran down Amara's spine. "This is it," Amara whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is where it all started." They exchanged a look, and with a final, shared breath, they descended into the unknown. The stairwell was narrow and winding, the stone steps slick with moisture. Every creak of their footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the silence that enveloped them. Amara's heart raced as she glanced over at Chica, whose face was etched with a mixture of fear and determination. The air grew heavier the further they descended, thick with a musty scent, almost like decayed wood and earth. "This place feels wrong," Chica whispered, her voice barely a breath. Amara didn't respond. She could feel it too, the oppressive weight pressing down on them, like a dark presence that stretched out from the very walls, waiting for them to slip up, to falter. They had come too far to turn back now, though. The truth was waiting below them. The stairs seemed to go on forever, spiraling deeper into the earth. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a heavy wooden door at the base. It was unlike anything Amara had ever seen in the church. The wood was ancient, darkened with age, and etched with strange symbols. Symbols she now recognized from the journal she'd found. Her fingers brushed against the cold surface, and she shivered. "This is it," Amara said, her voice trembling despite her attempts to stay calm. "The heart of the church. The heart of the covenant." Chica stepped forward, her flashlight illuminating the door's intricate carvings. "What now?" she asked, her voice tight. "We need to open it," Amara said. "But be careful. If the stories are true, this door has been sealed for a reason." They both knew what that meant. Whatever was behind this door, it wasn't meant to be seen by anyone. Amara reached for the handle. The moment her fingers touched it, a low, ominous hum filled the air. The sound was almost imperceptible at first, but as she twisted the handle, the hum grew louder, vibrating through the stone beneath their feet. The door groaned as it creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room beyond. Amara and Chica stepped inside, the chill in the air thickening. The room was circular, its walls lined with old books and strange relics. In the center of the room stood a stone altar, its surface covered with symbols that pulsed with a faint, eerie glow. Amara's breath caught in her throat as she took in the sight. She had seen these symbols before, on her father's desk, on the walls of the church, and even in the journal she had found. They were all connected. "This is where it all began," Amara murmured, her eyes scanning the room, trying to take in every detail. At the far end of the room, there was a large, ornate mirror, framed in gold and adorned with more of the same symbols. The mirror seemed out of place, like it didn't belong in this underground chamber. It was pristine, reflecting the dim light in a way that felt wrong. Chica stepped closer to the altar, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this place, Amara? What is all this?" Amara didn't know how to answer. She could feel the power in the air, an ancient, dark energy that seemed to be flowing through the room, through the walls, through them. It was as if the very fabric of the space had been woven with the covenant itself, its threads stretching into the heart of the church above. Suddenly, the air around them thickened, and Amara felt a cold draft stir. She turned to see the mirror flicker, the reflection shifting as if something, or someone, was moving inside. Her breath caught in her throat. "No, no, this can't be," Amara whispered, stepping back in shock. The reflection in the mirror wasn't just a reflection. It was something else entirely, something alive. She saw the figure of a man, his face shadowed but familiar. It was her father, Pastor Ezekiel, but his expression was twisted, his eyes hollow, as if he had been consumed by something dark. His lips moved, but no sound came from him. Chica gasped, backing away from the mirror. "Amara, is that your father?" Amara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just a vision. This was real. This was the Covenant's power, alive and active, drawing in everyone it touched. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the room, low and rumbling, as if coming from all around them. You should not have come here. Amara froze. The voice was not her father's, but it was unmistakably familiar, deep, resonant, and chilling. It was the voice she had heard in the back of her mind, the voice from her dreams, the voice of the entity that had been pulling the strings from the very beginning. You are meddling with forces beyond your understanding, the voice continued. This place, this covenant, it has been binding your family for generations. Your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather, all have made sacrifices to keep it alive. It is the price of power, the price of survival. Amara's legs trembled, and she grabbed onto the nearest shelf to steady herself. Who are you? She shouted, her voice cracking. What do you want from us? The voice chuckled, a dark, echoing sound that seemed to reverberate through the walls. What do I want? I want nothing. I have already taken what I need. You are simply collateral. The mirror shimmered again, and this time, the figure of her father stepped out from the glass, his form materializing in front of them. His eyes were hollow, as if drained of all life. He wore his usual pastor's robes, but they were tattered, worn, as if the weight of something terrible had worn them down. Amara stepped back, her heart breaking at the sight of her father, her strong, steadfast father, so changed. Father, she whispered, her voice trembling. What have they done to you? Her father's lips twitched into a grim smile. I did not have a choice, Amara. You have to understand. The Covenant, it is the only way to protect what we have. It was always meant to keep us safe. But at what cost? Amara cried, her voice rising in desperation. You've lost yourself. You've lost everything that made you who you are. Her father's smile faded, replaced with a look of sadness and regret. I didn't want this, but it was too late by the time I realized the price. His eyes flickered toward the mirror. The entity, it is not something that can be undone. Not by one person, not even by all of you together. Amara's heart sank. Was there no way to free her father? Was it too late? You are right to try, Amara, the voice spoke again, echoing in the air. But you will fail. There is no escape from the Covenant. Not for you. Not for anyone. Suddenly, the room seemed to pulse with energy, the walls vibrating, the symbols glowing brighter. Amara could feel the power building, a dark force rising from the very ground beneath her. She had to act quickly. We have to destroy it, she said, her voice full of conviction. The altar, the mirror, everything. We have to break the Covenant before it consumes us all. Chica nodded, though fear flickered in her eyes. But how? How do we destroy it? Amara glanced at the altar, where the symbols were now glowing fiercely. She had seen something in the journal, a ritual, a way to break the seal of the Covenant. It was a dangerous and complicated ritual, but it was their only chance. I think I know, Amara said, her voice steady now. We have to destroy the source. The altar, the mirror, the symbols, they're all connected. If we break them, we can break the Covenant. But as she stepped forward, her father's voice stopped her. Don't, he said, his tone pleading. You don't understand. The moment you try to break it, you will bring ruin upon us all. Amara's hands trembled, but she didn't hesitate. I have to try. With a final, desperate glance at her father, she reached for the altar. But the moment her fingers touched it, a surge of energy shot through her, and the room erupted in a flash of light.